Hi, everyone. We're just going to give a few more minutes to get started. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Services for Independent Living's Emergency Preparedness Training for Professionals. Today's webinar has been brought to you by Services for Independent Living. My name is India Jones. I am the Community Service Manager here at Services for Independent Living, and today I will be your webinar facilitator and speaker. Just want to go over a few housekeeping rules before we get started. All participants will be muted during the webinar. Please put whatever questions that you may have in the chat box. I will attempt to answer them at the end of the webinar. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you in a follow-up email in about 1 week. There will be a satisfaction survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. Please fill it out. This is how we get our feedback on how we're doing. Also, we get an idea of what other topics you guys would like to hear us cover. In the handout section, I have included a copy of Services for Independent Living's Emergency Preparedness Training Manual and also a resource document for emergency preparedness links. So please feel free to go into the handout section and download both of those items. So let's talk about the main objectives of today's training course. Basically, we want to give professionals guidance on how to work with a disability population when discussing emergency preparedness subject matter. We want to demonstrate the importance of making sure that consumers with disabilities are included in their own planning processes. And we also want to provide professionals with the tools to assist their consumers with forming emergency preparedness plans that will assist with staying safe during an emergency. So let's just sit here and think for a moment. What is emergency preparedness? Why is it important? I want to say that I really was never concerned about being prepared for an emergency until COVID-19 happened. Let's talk about COVID for a moment, right? This topic is probably not going to go away for a while. And it was at that very moment that I realized, wow, when I went to the different stores and I couldn't get simple items like toilet tissue or, any disinfectant, it really dawned on me like, oh my God, I am so not prepared for this situation. Emergency preparedness is a shared responsibility between you and your consumer or client, okay? Preparing for an emergency doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be real expensive, scary, or stressful. Emergency management is a great concern in our disability communities. There is a chance that your consumer or client will not already have their own emergency preparedness plan in place. That's why this is so important. This is where you come in as the professional. Too often, the needs of people with disabilities are not considered in emergency planning, period. And I want you guys to think about that for a moment. It's almost like somebody taking control of your will or something that is important to you and making all the decisions for you, but not including you. That wouldn't be a good feeling, nor would it be too beneficial for you. I want to take a second to have everybody watch this quick video. It's not long. Just a moment, you guys. Ooh, okay. It's always some kind of technical difficulty, right? Okay. So basically, this video was a representation of the reason why it is really, really important to have an emergency plan in place whenever a disaster may occur. And that can be a flood, a snowstorm. Um, if a disaster occurs, local government and relief organizations will try to help you, but it is important to be prepared because that is not always the case. Sometimes the local disaster relief and government responders may not be able to reach you right away or reach you at all. So Belinda was unable to evacuate before or during Hurricane Katrina. Her friend told her pretty much the water was rushing into her home just before the phone went dead. She didn't hear from her friend for a few days, and basically her body and her wheelchair were found floating inside of her home several days later. So if you look at this situation, this is just one case out of so many. Individuals with disabilities are really, one of the demographics that we have to make sure that we are looking after, as a professional, or even if you have someone in your family who has some sort of disability, it's important to make sure that we're looking out for these people, teaching them about the importance of emergency preparedness and how to pretty much prepare in the event that they are faced with these type of situations. As a professional, you can help your client prepare for emergencies. Think about Benny's situation. Since her original plan fell through, she had no way to evacuate out of her flooding apartment once her pre-organized ride canceled on her. And I want you guys to look at that word, pre-organized, because she thought that she was preparing and, doing the right thing for herself, but it fell through. But should she had just been left to die? No. This could be any one of our consumers or clients that can be in this same situation at any moment. Let's talk about disability awareness just for a moment. Disability awareness helps to remove barriers so that responsible, self-sufficient people with disabilities can assume risks, make their own choices, and contribute as they wish. This is a vision in which we all will win. So let's just talk about, as a professional, how you can make a difference. Depending on the profession you're in, whether it's the medical field, you're a social worker, a caseworker, any of those things, you have a duty to protect and address health and safety issues with your consumer or your client. It is critical to educate and provide emergency preparedness training, not only to the people with the disabilities that you deal with, even the people who don't have them, but also their caregivers and their family members. Because if you think about it, this is their support team. You may have a client that may not have any family, but that caregiver that may come for 4 hours a day, 5 little days a week, is their only source of having some type of protection or help or assistance within their lives. Let's talk about some reasons that professionals should include emergency preparedness in their practices. One, like I just said, the duty to protect and address health and safety issues. The next one would be it gives your consumers or your client the tools they need to prepare for an emergency. And this is something that can help them not feel scared, not feel worried, not build up anxiety. We live in a society where emergencies are prevalent. I am located actually in Euclid, Ohio, which is in Cleveland, Ohio. And although we don't have hurricanes or, things of that nature, we still have pretty bad snowstorms, and things that can prevent someone from getting in or out their home safely to evacuate. We have bad power outages here. So, just think about wherever you live at and whatever emergency situations you can remember have occurred. Were you prepared? That's the thing I want you guys to think of. And if you weren't prepared, wouldn't you have liked to have this conversation ahead of time or had the opportunity to possibly get prepared? We want to help stop the institutionalization of individuals with paralysis or some other form of a disability by implementing proper emergency planning. How many individuals are in nursing homes or institutions because they don't have the proper support to stay at home? What about the people who actually get a little bit support to stay at home? Those are definitely the type of clients or consumers that you want to really work with diligently to make sure that they have emergency plans in place. So that way they don't have to go back to an institution or a nursing home. And then, of course, we want to promote continued independence for our consumers and clients. So, of course, just like any situation, there's always an intake process. The best way to get an idea of what your consumer understands about emergencies and if they are prepared for one is to what? Go over some questions with them, have them fill out an emergency preparedness intake paperwork packet. And we, at Services for Independent Living, we actually have all of these documents available that were created. If you guys ever want some examples of what that may look like, please feel free to email me and I will get those things to you. So when you're completing intake paperwork, it's just like if you're a social worker or you're seeing a client or a patient for the first time, you have to pretty much get to know them, in person or virtually, because of course, with COVID, we've all learned how to do a lot of things virtually, right? Or even by phone is good. You want to be patient with your consumer during this process. You don't want your consumer to feel rushed or, overwhelmed. You want the responses to be as detailed as possible. So our questionnaire paperwork that we actually came up with, our intake paperwork, it has 4 different parts. Part A is just a emergency prep questionnaire to try to get a feel for where they are in an emergency planning situation. Do they even have one? Have they thought about it? Part B is identifying who their support team is. It's really important to find out if they even have a support system or a support team or a family member or someone that they consider as a person that they can rely on. Part C is pretty much an emergency plan checklist. So we'll get more into that in the next few slides. And then part D is important documents. And we all know that during an emergency, one of the most important things that we need to have in place is our important documents, whether it's our social security card, our birth certificate, our bank statements, anything that's of value and is important, we need to have all of those things in one place. So that way, when the emergency occurs, we got it, we can leave with it, we can access it. So after you've gone through those steps with your consumer or client, you can actually start getting a feel for what they need. Because in order to help your consumer or client build an emergency preparedness kit, we have to go through those steps first so we can know where they're at and meet them at the needs that they need. So I always tell people when it comes to building a kit with your consumer or your client, or even just for yourself, try to consider creating 2 different kits. You want to have an in-home preparedness kit and then a kit that you can actually evacuate with. Now, the evacuation kit, it will be like a lightweight, smaller version of the things you need that you can take with you or your client or your consumer can take with them if they need to evacuate their home immediately. And then the home preparedness kit is everything that they will need to stay where they are and support themselves for at least up to 3 to 5 days, okay? So let's just talk about some supplies that we definitely will need. And this is for both kits pretty much. Water. We're always going to need water. 1 gallon of water per person per day is an ideal thought of what to pretty much buy, ahead of time. A 3 to 5 day supply of non-perishable food. We want to have something to eat in case the power goes out or we can't use or cook, use the microwave, we can't cook. Your client can't do any of these things. We want to make sure that they have some non-perishable food items that they can easily access and still, and not have to go without food while they're going without lights or power or, whatever the situation may be. A week's supply of medications and medical supplies. This is important, but I also understand that a lot of times this could be something hard for our clients or consumers to do because a lot of times they're only given enough prescription meds for the allotted time that they need to take the prescriptions. So they don't always have an extra week supply of medications, to just put in a kit somewhere. So this is where they would have to consult with their physician or doctor about being able to obtain something like this. You want to make sure that they have at least 1 flashlight, extra batteries, warm coat, gloves or mittens, hats, boots, blankets, easily accessible depending on the weather, face mask and protection items to cover open wounds, battery powered or hand cranked radios, because of course once the power goes out, we got to rely on batteries a lot. If they have young children, they want to make sure that they have extra formula, diapers, or incontinence supplies for themselves, if those are some of the things they need. So like I said, every consumer or client is different, and what they need will be different. But these are just some basic overall ideas of what supplies should be in both kits. Of course, if they have a pet, people, they love their pets. A lot of people have service animals. And so, you want to make sure that your client or your consumer that may have a pet or a service animal is also prepared for that pet. Any cash, coins, or credit cards, they need to make sure they have available and ready to go. And we recommend low denominations of those things. Everyone needs a first aid kit. One of the things that I like is when I deal with consumers here at Services for Independent Living, even before this pandemic hit and emergency preparedness became something that I wanted to really talk about, I always want to ask the consumers, do you have a first aid kit in your home? And the first aid kit can be made up of different things based off of a person's needs. But here again, here's a basic overview of what can be in a first aid kit. Okay. So you may have some sterile dressings, cleansing agents, antibiotic ointments, adhesive bandages, eye wash solutions, thermometers, of course, prescription medications, non-prescription medications, pain relievers, anti-diarrhea medications, antacids, laxatives, scissors, tweezers, lubricants. Now, let's talk about if your client or even yourself may have a vehicle, and it may be a smart choice to leave a kit in your vehicle. If your consumer or client has a vehicle, they may also want to keep emergency supplies in it in case they become stranded or are away from home when an emergency happens. Some items that are suggested to keep in your trunk of your car can be sand, rock salt, or non-clumping kitty litter. And this is to provide traction on ice if you become stuck in the snow. How many of us have been stuck in the snow here in Ohio? I know I have. And I actually keep a shovel in my trunk for that reason. Paper and pencil or pen, books, games, and activities for children. You know what that means. When you get stranded, the kids are like getting antsy. They want to know, hey, when are we going to get out of here? Having books, games, and activities can, possibly keep them quiet for a little while. And, while you're trying to figure out the situation. Jumper cables, shovel and ice scraper. Nowadays, they have the jumper boxes that you can actually plug up at home, and I recommend if your client or consumer can afford the actual boxes, is better because you don't have to wait for another person with their vehicle to actually jump your vehicle. And then always keep in mind too, a lot of these suggestions can become costly. We want to remember some of our clients or consumers are on a budget. A lot of them are on a strict set budget. I deal with a lot of clients who, don't really have over maybe $1,050 a month. So anytime I make recommendations, I make sure I look up the most cost-effective way for them to obtain the items. A full gas tank and a gas can, yes. How many times has someone ran out of gas? And that is an emergency because you can't get anywhere after that. So it's always important to try to make sure that you have some gas in your car, or if you can have a gas can available, at least you can get to the nearest gas station. Sterile gloves, your first aid kit, non-perishable food, and bottled water in the car as well. So let's just talk about some of the things that your consumer may need during an emergency situation. And this can be a person with a disability or a person without. Transportation, that's a big one. Look at the story that we just viewed. That young woman, she was supposed to be picked up by local officials. During that emergency, she was left behind. She wound up drowning and dying in her own apartment. So having transportation figured out as far as who can come and get you or what organization you can work with your client or consumer to make sure that they have this already in place, that is very, very important. Any adaptive equipment that your client or consumer may need to keep with them during an emergency, that is something that needs to be talked about and made aware. Any medications that they may be on. Of course, we've talked about medications a few times, but That's because it is really an important item to have, especially, depending on a person's situation of what kind of, I'm sorry, as far as a person's situation, they will need, their medications to make sure that they're staying healthy, staying on the regimen that the doctor gave them, and, they're not compromising their health during that emergency. Any durable medical equipment that they may need, help from another individual to transfer. What if you have a stroke, a person who had a stroke, recently, and they cannot ambulate on their own? Do they have someone that can come in and help them? And if they don't, let's start thinking of ways to get that type of help for them ahead of time before an emergency can occur. Any assistive technology or other medical health needs, all of these things need to be talked about with your client or your consumer. So after you talk to them about all of these things and they filled out these checklists for you, and you have a really good idea of what they need and how you can help them set up their kits based off of what they already have and they don't have. Now we go into the process of formulating a good plan for them with them. And remember, we're just here to assist them. We want their voice to be heard. We want them to feel very involved in their own emergency planning. So all of the information that you gather from the intake paperwork will help your consumer or client create their emergency plan at this point. As a professional, we want to make sure that people with disabilities are aware of emergency procedures, that our consumers have an emergency plan in place, that they understand that they may need to double up their supportive devices. They are prepared to evacuate during a fire or other emergency, that they have a plan to promote response to medical emergencies, that they are aware of shelter-in-place safety locations, that they have prepared important messages that's legible and proactive shields, and that they have general information and phone numbers readily available, whether it's a family members or the local fire departments or health departments. All of those, call for help. Whatever important information, they need them readily available, and they need to know how to get access to them. And then they need to have the kits for their home or evacuation use. Some questions that you can bring up to get your consumer thinking a little bit, because this is a bit much. And so when we offer emergency preparedness training for our consumers as services for independent living, we break it up into increments. So that way they're not overwhelmed. One day we work on intake paperwork. The next day we work on getting all of their important documents together. The next time we, work on putting together a plan. And then the next time we work on getting together any type of whatever they have already. We encourage them to utilize it for their kits, and then we actually help them and give them resources to get things that they need that they may not be able to afford. So, it is a whole lot. And as the professional, it's our job to not create more anxiety, but to ease the client's mind, or, and get them to thinking like, hey, we can get this done. I'm here to help you, and we'll do it in increments. So some questions that you can ask them during these times that you're meeting with your client, you can ask them what their emergency evacuation consists of. Some people don't have one because no big emergencies have happened in their area to even make them think like this. Who do you call in the event of an emergency? This is so important. I always say this because they may bring up a person, but guess what? If that person doesn't know that they are their go-to emergency call person, that can cause a conflict. So whenever a client gives me a person's information, I ask for permission to get in contact with that person before I put them on their sheet as listed as their emergency contact person in the event of a emergency situation. I want to make sure that this person is aware and agrees to this, because that is very important. Another question I asked them: do you have a safe shelter in place or to go? Shelter in place to go. So, for example, we in Cleveland here, we have a lot of shelters, but some of our shelters are not disability friendly. And what I mean by that, they don't accommodate different situations. So that can be a big, red stop sign for an individual that needs somewhere to go. Their apartment, is they can't stay in it. They need somewhere to go for a few days. but yet they have no room to accept them along with their motorized wheelchair or no accommodation. So that's something that we've been trying to, contact individuals legislative wise in all different types of areas to try to get that changed, because I don't know how it is in some other people's communities, but in this community, they do not accommodate a lot of times at some of these shelters. Do they have an emergency to go and ready bag? Have they practiced an emergency evacuation? And by practicing, that just means, hey, running through the steps of what they will do in the event that this really happens. These type of questions will help from a baseline to go from. And then it will also assist you in helping your client or consumer to form their emergency plans. Let's talk about some tips that you can give your consumers or clients while assisting them to create their own plan. So you can help create a support network in the event of an emergency. That's just something I was just talking about. Tell people in their support network where to find emergency supplies. This is another important thing. If they designate one or two people, to pretty much be their go-to person to call in the event of an emergency, this person has to know where to find these supplies and the kits that we are creating for them. So it has to be an open communication between the client or your consumer and those people that they, are choosing to be their go-to support network. So they need to give one or both of the support network persons a trust key to their house. I know a lot of you have probably seen the new day and age little locks that can go on doors where you just put a key hold in it and then it opens up and the actual key can be retrieved and then the door can be opened. That is a great, great option for an individual with a disability that may have restrictions on being able to walk around or mobilize on their own. So that way, in the event of an emergency, that person can come right on in and get to helping them. We have something called an ICE card. It's just to be created in case of emergency. It's like an emergency info list to let others know whom to call if they find your client or consumer unconscious or if they're unable to speak or if they need help, evacuating. And this will include medical information as well about their medical providers and the names of any medications to take, the dosages, and how often. That's something that we all have to think about too. What if your client or consumer is unconscious and then someone stumbles in to help them? They have to have these type of items available so that they can help the client or consumer in the best way that they can. Also, it's important to list the condition for which or why your client or consumer takes that medication, the name of the doctor who prescribed it, the phone number, and the pharmacy location as well. Keep records of all adaptive equipment they use, any allergies, sensitivities, and communication or cognitive difficulties that they may have. You want to attach copies of health insurance cards and related information. So again, all of this stuff goes in with your consumer or client's important paperwork. You want to maintain several copies, like I just said, of all of the things that I just discussed. You want to keep at least a 7-day supply of essential medications if possible by calling, their doctor, not you, but they need to call their doctor and see if they can get such a thing. Because like I said, a lot of insurance, they only give the client or consumer exactly what they need for that prescribed amount of time. So, help to work with them to encourage them to talk to their doctors about getting some extra medication supplies. Keep their service animals with them in a safe place at home or take them with them to the shelter. Now, this is another issue that we have run into with some of our clients and consumers because a lot of the shelters don't want to allow, like I said, they're low on the accommodating side. They don't want to allow a person's service animal in with them, and that's just not right. So these type of things have to change. If your client or consumer has an animal and it is listed as a service animal, that's something else that they have to have with them. Have record of their service animal and documentation ready. So that way there's no questions about if their animal is really a service animal and things like that. During an emergency, you don't have a lot of time. So if we help our client or consumer prepare for these things ahead of time, they'll have a better chance of having a smooth turnover, from leaving a hectic situation and kind of going into a safety situation. And of course, have that extra food, water, and supplies for the service animal as well. So A lot of times, a lot of clients have asked us, how do I develop my support network? Your consumer will need to make a list of the individuals that they can count on or that they think that they can count on in the event of an emergency. Help them identify who these individuals are. So if they give you a list of names and numbers, okay, let's talk about who this person is to you. How long have you known this person? Things of that nature. Ask more questions so that way you can get a feel of who this person is to them. Inform them that they will need to contact these individuals to make sure that they are able to help. Like I said before, so many times I've had a client list 3, 4, 5 names, and guess what? A lot of the numbers were either disconnected or they did not make that initial contact with that person before they gave us the number to make sure that this individual can really be a support part of their support network. I always encourage our clients or consumers to meet with their support network occasionally. There's always things that you may need to update or let your consumer or tell your consumer that they need to voice. So, for example, say your consumer had recently had a surgery, okay? And so that's something that they need to be staying in contact with their support network about, because in the event of an emergency, this person may not be able to move around as swiftly as they were before this surgery happened. So now their needs have changed a little bit, right? Right. So it's really important for them to try to meet and keep in contact with their support network occasionally. They will need to teach these individuals on how to assist them and how their devices operate and things of that nature. So that's why it's important to have them meet in person. If these people are not family members or a caregiver that's already knowing these things, you're going to need to be educated. Your consumer's emergency plan should be tailored specifically to their needs. Okay. So you want to assist your consumer in developing the plan by communications and by 3 different steps. So they're going to have a communication and reunification plan. They're going to have an evacuation plan and a shelter in place plan. So the communications reunification plan options, usually consumers should keep a battery operated charger in case of a power outage, along with whistles, horns, or anything that can create loud noises. Program contacts in their phone using numbers. Example, your consumer can reach someone immediately by pressing the number 1, and it will immediately connect that person to their mother or their sister or whoever they're trying to reach. Okay. So this is important to actually sit down and, if you're show whatever phone your client may have, whether it's a smartphone or whatever, see if they have this capability. That way, during an emergency, they only have to press number 3 to reach their dad or number 1 to reach their daughter. And instead of them having to think, they're nervous and they may forget the number, or they may forget or how to scroll through their phone. So just trying to make things easier for your client or your consumer is your biggest concern. Okay. There should be a designated meeting place that has been chosen ahead of time that will be the meeting place in emergency situations. So this is important too, because your client or consumer could have an evacuation plan, but if they didn't talk and make good communication with the people who are there to help them, then the plans that they have worked so hard to put in place can fall through. So that is very important. And during their evacuation plan, we just witnessed that sometimes the local authorities or help teams can't get out to people. The local shelters sometimes can't house a person depending on what accommodations they need. I mean, it's terrible. But the evacuation plan that you help your client or consumer come up with needs to have the thought in it of, okay, if you can't get help from these people during your evacuation plan, what is your backup plan? If your consumer has a car, suggest that they keep a full tank of gas. Just things like this to keep on making them think like, hey, I'll be prepared in the event that this happens. I'll be prepared if I have to jump in my car quickly. Will I have time to stop to get gas? You never know, but you just want to keep talking to them about these options so that way. And it will seem repetitive, but I have had people say, you know what? I'm so happy that you repeated this, this, and this while we went over this and that, because guess what happened to me the other day? Or guess what? And I'm telling you, it will resonate in their heads in the event of an emergency happening. They need to know, will a friend or a caregiver or a family member be their designated ride if they don't drive, you know? Will they have to depend on an outside source if they don't have a designated family member or friend? What form of transportation will they need? For example, a vehicle with a wheelchair lift, or an ambulance or ambulette. So all of these things need to be thought about ahead of time so that they can be put in place. Now, with sheltering in place, explain to your consumer or your client that there will be times during certain emergencies that they will just have to stay put right where they're at. This is considered sheltering in place. If this happens, they should already be prepared, right? With their sheltering in place kit that you help them create. They should immediately bring in any pets if they're outside, if there's a bad storm out, and contact family and other support team members to let them know what their status is and what's going on. Here are important steps for sheltering in place. Find a safe place. You want to talk to your consumer about these things because a lot of people have never had the shelter in place. Let them know that they need to choose a room in advance to shelter in, with closing all the windows and exterior doors. Maybe they can hang some type of shelter in place sign outside of their door if they live in a house or, in an apartment. So that way, if local officials are riding by, they do see the sign and they know that, okay, this is a place where we need to respond and help that person inside of that house or that apartment. Call 911 and notify emergency response team of your whereabouts. Turn off all fans, heating, and air conditioning systems. Get your disaster supply kit or your to-go bag and a working radio. Like I said before, bring your pets with you if you can to the shelter. Make sure you have your pet supplies. If not to the shelter, I'm sorry. If you're sheltering in place, make sure you have enough supplies for your pets. Use duct tape and plastic sheeting heavier than food wrap to seal all cracks and vents in the room. Keep listening to your radio or your television or anything that you're able to have if your power is still on, of course, if for any local officials, and if they're calling different evacuation situations or updates on how the weather is going. Depending on where your consumer or your client is located, the type of disasters and emergencies will differ, right? So research what disasters are prone to occur in their location and educate them on those situations. Such hazards can include, but are not limited to, floods, hurricanes, power outages, severe winter storms, extreme heat, tornadoes, etc. So let's talk about some common miscues. These are some things that happen during emergencies to individuals with disabilities time after time. A lot of times, separating service animals from their owners. That's a very bad idea. Like I expressed before, a lot of people really rely on their service animals. So separating them is not an option. We need to be making sure that we're making accommodations that include their service animal. Not allowing evacuation chairs in hallways. This has been a situation that has happened time and time again. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a client and they're like, hey, I'm in a powered wheelchair, but I am able to transfer into one of the easier mobile wheelchairs. But I have to leave my electrical wheelchair where it's at to do this, and that's a problem. So I want to say this was a person who was staying in a kind of like a nursing rehabilitation facility. And so these are things that you would think that these type of facilities are already thinking about and accommodating when there is an emergency, when they want to practice these little fire drills and things like that. People that are able to move and help themselves are still running into issues because they don't want the chairs in the hall or don't want this. They have to make accommodations for people. And this is something that we are not seeing a whole lot, but it is starting to get a little better. Not involving the disability community in their planning processes. This, once again, who wants a plan created for themselves that does not include their thoughts, their needs, or their feelings? No one. Another common miscue is whether individuals with disabilities should evacuate immediately or wait for first emergency responders. That's a big one right there. What if the emergency responders don't come? So there needs to be a plan set in place for everyone, regardless of your disability. And then the last one is not recognizing non-obvious invisible disabilities. We all know that a person can have a disability, but upon looking at them, you won't be able to tell. That doesn't mean that they don't need help or extra assistance. And then I always talk to consumers or my clients about personal preparedness. What is personal preparedness? Your consumer needs to recognize that they have a disability that will need additional attention and assistance. I have met a lot of individuals that hold a sense of pride. They are very prideful and they love to be independent and they like to do everything for themselves. So those type of individuals will take a little bit more time for you to talk to and let them know, hey, I love your independence, but in the event of an emergency, I need you to recognize that you will maybe need assistance, okay? And go from there with that person. Make sure that they have their critical information readily available. Make sure that they know that they need to establish a support network, and they need to have their personal needs ready to go in the event of an emergency. So, like, this is a partnership. Yes, you're the professional that will be encouraging your client or consumer to get all emergency preparedness ready, but on their end, they need to be making sure that they are able to do these things as well. It's very important to provide a list of resources to your consumer. Make sure that all the information that you provide to your consumer are available in accessible formats, different formats such as Braille, large print, audio, and disc, closed caption material, etc. The following resources should be based in the area that your consumer or client resides in, okay? So make sure they have information for the Department of Senior and Adult Services, Office of Emergency Management, Office of Homeless Services, the Sheriff's Department, of course, Witness Victim Service Center, emergency shelter listings, and United Way. And no matter where they're located, United Way is always 211. Let's talk about emotional and mental health for a moment. Emergencies can cause your consumer to develop fears and anxiety. You need to talk about emotional issues with sheltering in place. Talk to your consumer about how that makes them feel or how that would make them feel. Recommend different activities that your consumer can do to, with their time in the event that they are cooped up in the house or locked in their car, for a moment because they can't get out of the car. Just talk to them about options that they can pretty much take to help with their emotional and mental stress at those times. Let them know that the feelings that they are having are normal and that you deal with other clients and consumers or even your own fears are the same. So that way they're not feeling like, hey, am I the only one that feels this way? And then again, after all of this planning and talking to your consumer or your client about all of these things that they need to do, it's crazy that they still have to have a backup plan for that plan that you just helped them with. After you assist them in formulating their emergency preparedness plans, they will need to have a backup plan for if that falls through. So let's just talk about some scenarios right now. What if your consumer must relocate, but will still need their routinely home care services? Like, who could they turn to, right? A lot of times their insurance or they may be paying out of pocket for a home care assistant, and then something happens at their home and they have to go over a family member's house or something like that. They need to be prepared to be able to call whatever agency that they go through or whatever they're getting their services through to make the adjustments, right? Will they be relocating in the same area, county, or state? Hopefully they will. But if they do have to go out of the county or to another state due to some unforeseen circumstances, this is something that they need to think of ahead of time on how they can continue their care. Will their home health mental health, and other services transfer with them? I mean, these days, a phone call can be made and services can be transferred to different clinics, different hospitals, different doctors. But this is just something that you want to bring up to your consumer or client in the event that they do have to leave their home, right? Because this is a big change for them. So you want them to know, like, hey, if you ever need to relocate, at least you know that you can get your services transferred over, and this is how you go about that. Medicaid is another thing. That's another need that they need, and they get fearful of what's going to happen to my Medicaid, what's going to happen to my benefits. So always just be sensitive to the fact that their consumer is always worrying about their needs, their health care, their items, and being able to talk to them a little bit more about, hey, there is a way to transfer these things will ease their thoughts a little. So let's think about this. A terrible storm has hit town and causes a power outage. Paul is a paraplegic that uses an electric wheelchair to get around. The battery on his chair is going to die soon. What are some preparations that Paul could have made ahead of time that could help him during this situation? So, because we're not able to talk directly here, I am going to actually pull up a question, and I want you guys to vote. What could Paul have done ahead of time that could have helped him in this situation? Now think about something. All of those options are correct, but let's choose the best one out of all of those options, or the most doable one. Okay. So when you think about it, having a backup generator is really expensive. And a lot of times our clients or consumers are blessed to have one, but what about the ones that can't afford it? Or they don't live in a facility or a place that can allow them to have one of their own? Having an extra battery for backup, yes, that is awesome, right? To actually have another battery that they can easily switch from in the event that this happens, so that way he can still get around. And then of course, having someone that he can call to help him out will be, something that's most sufficed, I would think. Let's talk about COVID-19 for a moment. Again, you guys, many people with developmental disabilities have lost access to caregivers and service providers, and these supports may not return given the financial toll of the pandemic on agencies and state budgets. Having strong support systems in place can help your consumer or your client that are currently, experiencing issues like this tremendously. Let's think about COVID. When it happened, no one was prepared for it, right? No one. Not me, not you, not your consumers, not your clients. Again, disability lives were lost, and it ranked to the top at that time. You had people who were left in their houses that, they really needed caregivers. Caregivers were scared to go in the houses because they didn't want to bring anything to their clients and expose them to anything, and they didn't want to catch anything themselves, so they just quit. Congregate care is not considered in a lot of people's planning. Personal protective equipment needs caught everyone's attention, and it caught us off guard because guess what? They became scarce. We were barely able to get the things we needed from stores because the shelves were bare. Shelter in place took on a new meaning, didn't it? All of a sudden, we were all locked in our houses and, pretty much scared to go out, didn't want to go out. A lot of people were facing depression, and they were getting low on supplies, right? Food supplies, delivery and assistance was now another option. A lot of people were ordering their groceries and then leaving them on a porch and sanitizing them and wiping them down. So I'm just trying to get you guys in the mind frame of where we just were, because COVID wasn't too far away. We're still going on. It's still going on right now. We have, vaccinations, thank God, but these are some of the things that a lot of people were facing or going through. Developmental disability services had been interrupted, and a lot of challenges were faced. Let's talk about your consumer and clients, caregivers, and family members. There is a such thing as burnout. Caregivers and family members may become burnt out during longer lasting emergencies. What are some things that your consumer or client can do during this time to alleviate some of the stress that's going on? They can create kind of like a buddy system and it never rely on just one person. So that way, that one go to person is not becoming overwhelmed or burnt out. Encourage your consumer or client to do as much as they can for themselves. We want to promote independence, right? And if you don't use it, you lose it, they say. So it's important for us to encourage our clients and our consumers to do as much as they can for themselves during an emergency. So that way, whoever is there helping them doesn't feel such a heavy load. Encourage them to be patient and gentle with whoever it is that's helping them. You know, you never know what that person has going on in their personal life, but hey, they are there to help them. So everybody needs to be patient, work together. And then also your consumer or client connecting with their local area agencies for tips too can give them other resources that won't need to be, met by that caregiver or that family member maybe, and that can alleviate some stress. I included this slide because I really like the statement and what it says. It just says, make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. I absolutely love that. These are just a few resources that were used to create our emergency preparedness training manual that we do have in the handout section for download for you guys. And it's also some of the websites that we offer to our clients and our consumers to utilize to get emergency preparedness ready in their lives. So now I'm going to go and see if we have any questions. And even if you don't have any questions right away, if you think of some later, please feel free to email me at any time. Let's see. Okay, so I don't see any really. Let me see what this says. Oh, wow. So the video had no sound. That's just great, right? I'm sorry, you guys. I was not able to see that while I was facilitating, but the video is actually also, I put the video link in, should be either the handouts or one of them. So you guys can go back and watch it on your own. And when you get a follow-up email for this webinar, I'm going to make sure I put that link in there because that video was really touching and I want you guys to actually hear it and see it. So here is my contact information over at Services for Independent Living. We will be having a number of emergency preparedness workshops coming up. And so I want you guys to keep your eyes and ears open because I would love to have you guys. They're going to be more interactive, so they won't be on this kind of platform. It'll be more of like a Zoom platform, so that way we can actually talk and relay information and share thoughts. I want to thank everyone for attending today. Feel free to download those handouts in the handout section, and please send me any questions or thoughts to the email address ijones@sil-ohio.org. Everyone, enjoy this beautiful day outside, and I hope to see you soon on one of our upcoming webinars.